Okay, we're going to begin. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check. Nothing? Nothing. Oh, here we go. All right, here we go. Okay. Good afternoon. Today's Monday, February 22nd, 2016. Welcome to the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee meeting. Councilmember Joe Buscaino, Chair. I'm joined here by Council Members Martinez, O'Farrell, and Ryu. Thank you for joining us. Those of you listening on Council Audio, we welcome you. If I can direct your attention to the agenda now. We have two consent items. Colleagues, unless you want to pull items number 4 and 5. We'll take those two items on consent, unless you want to pull them.
Council members, John White, City Clerk, you have a
Mr.
request
Clerk.
for a speaker's card on item number 5.
Item number 5. We'll hold item 5 on the desk. In fact, let's take that item 5 now. Bring up the speaker.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Len Wynn. I'm a senior field deputy for Council Member Mike Bonin.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hi. I'm here on behalf of Council Member Mike Bonin to ask your support to approve the final design for the Mar Vista Gateway sign. I distributed copies to you. This project was funded in 2014. It's a reprogramming of some money that then Council Member Rosendahl had set aside as part of street furniture for the beautification of Venice Boulevard in Mar Vista. $100,000 was allocated, $40,000 was spent. In 2012, the community came back to us and said we'd like to do some gateway signs for Mar Vista. So then we introduced the motion in 2014 to reprogram the remainder of that money, which is approximately $60,000. The council member then put together an advisory design committee to help with the design of the sign. That comprised of 4 members. They're each community leaders representing 3 of the neighborhood associations in Mar Vista. The street services then created a bunch of designs, and the committee selected the one that you see before you, which represents the single-family nature of most of Mar Vista's homes. In December of 2014, the Mar Vista Community Council voted to approve the design with some tweaks. They wanted the surfer out, and they wanted it less cartoony. So we went ahead and made those changes, and that final design is before you today.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for your hard work and working with the community-based organizations and neighborhood councils in the Mar Vista area.
Thank you.
The schematics look really nice. The design, working with Bureau of Street Services, look really nice. So we have a motion to approve this item. Okay, we have a motion. Second.
As amended.
By Mr. O'Farrell. We'll approve item number 5 as amended.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's also, we'll take item number 4 and without objection approve that on consent. Without objection. Very good. Okay, with that, colleagues, let's turn to item 1. And if you can read that, Mr. Clerk, into the record.
CAO and City Attorney reports an ordinance relative to finance and refinance a loan for the acquisition and installation of various streetlight improvements in an amount not to exceed $29 million. B, providing for the leaseback financing in connection with the MICLA 2016 streetlights financing by approving the lease and sublease of certain property consisting of approximately 2,800 streetlight poles and the lamps installed therein and other related items therein or attached thereto to the City of LA as lessor or sublessee. C, amending the LA Ad Code to add sections 5.162.38 and 5.162.39 to create related special funds.
Can you repeat that? I'm just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Joining us here is from the CEO's office, Natalie Brill. Thank you, Ms. Brill. Please provide us with an overview. I understand there's some cost savings that you dug up in your work that you've done here at the CAO. Let's hear more. Thank you for your hard work on this.
So we're proposing to refinance a loan from DWP to do the street lighting work. In addition to that, to issue new money. And the reason we're doing this is because we believe we could get a better rate in the marketplace than we could going to DWP. And the reason is because we have a tax-exempt rate versus a taxable rate. So the rate that we had from DWP was 4.97%, which is a very good rate if you're a homeowner. But if you're the city of LA, we got 1.89%. And we did that through a direct loan with Bank of America. This will allow us to provide for the program itself, where we'll be financing the LED conversion program for 22,000 poles, approximately 22,000 poles, and the high voltage conversion program would be accelerated with 6,200 poles. So basically, this financing will save the department about $360,000, which they will then be able to use for something else in their department. So if you have specific questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brill. Colleagues, any questions? Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question, this program, does it also include conversion of lights under tunnels, under freeways? And I'm seeing the answer is no. Is it strictly just street lights only?
Correct, street lighting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
How many streetlights will you be installing in next fiscal year?
I believe that for 15-16, this fiscal year, the high voltage conversion program will convert about 1,200. In 16-17, 5,000. For the LED conversion program, the conversion is about 7,500 this year and next fiscal year. We already converted in 14-15, another 7,500.
And what city staff is going to be responsible for administering this project?
I believe the Bureau of Street Lighting can answer that. Bureau of Street Lighting.
Bureau of Street Lighting here? There he is. Good afternoon. Thank you, Natalie.
Good afternoon. Ed Ibrahimian, the Director of Bureau of Street Lighting. I'm not sure if I understood the question.
I just want to know what department is going to be administering the
Bureau of
project.
Street Lighting. Okay. We will handle it. We're going to do some of the work in-house and some of the work with contract. Actually, our plan is to accelerate our high voltage conversion and finish it in next 5 years. We may come back to your committee in next couple of years to get additional funding for this purpose.
And do you have a list by council district where these lights are going to be placed?
They're all over the city. They're scattered all over the city, but we can.
But I'm sure you can break it down per council district.
Yeah, we can break it down.
If you can get that to me, that would be great.
Of course, of course.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Happy to be joined by our colleague, Councilmember Price. Thank you, Kern, for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Ed. Any other questions? Mr. Price.
Could you talk a little bit about what the timeline is? I apologize for being late on this.
Okay.
You may have gone over this before, what the timeline is. And is there going to be a role for outside contractors in helping to make this project happen smoothly and efficiently?
Yes, some of the work is going to be done by in-house crews that we have, and some of the work is going to be contracted out.
Most of it's going to be in-house, or most? Do you have any idea of how much?
Well, for the high voltage, basically we've made the decision to do 2,500, half and half. Half and half we'll do in-house, the other half will go out to contract. Again, it's scattered all over the city, wherever we have high voltage circuits. We have a total of 25,000 streetlights that are on high voltage circuits today. And with this program, our plan is to more or less convert everything in the next 5 years by doing 5,000 every year. Again, 2,500 in-house, 2,500 with contract. Annually,
over
yes.
The next 5 years.
Yes.
And do you have a team of contractors skilled in this already? Are you going to be recruiting? How are you going to advertise? How are you going to recruit?
Yeah, we go to the Board of Public Works bid and award process, and we advertise them. The contractors have to be C10 contractors, and basically we advertise, receive bids, and award it to the lowest responsible bidder. Okay. That's a process we've been doing for many years.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Rue.
Thank you. And I know this motion is more about the financing part, but since we started the discussion,
Yes.
I really thank you for all your efforts. And I'm really looking forward to the 5-year plan because there's a lot of updates that need to be happening in my district as well. But can you just talk about, and I know we spoke about this before, so if you could comment on the progress and working with the film industry as well as various environmental and animal welfare protection groups on the actual brightness, intensity of some of the LEDs, the different shades and directional and...
Well, yeah, LED technology is a completely different technology than the lamp technology. Lamp basically throws the light all over the place. LED is directional, so we can control the light. Also, we can specify the color temperature of the light with the LED. And we have been doing that. Actually, we've standardized a specification that is being used throughout the country, which is kind of a warm white light that we've installed. We've installed 165,000 LED lights throughout the city, and it has worked really well so far for us. We haven't received any complaints, very few, handful of complaints overall by installing 165,000 lights. But we do work with the film industry if they want to change the color of the fixtures. It's very easy with some filming to be attached, or plastic different color to be attached on the fixtures. It's very simple to do it if they want to approach us.
Okay. Well, I just want to really thank you on those efforts, and my office will be following up with you to make sure we're highly in sync with the film industry as well as the animal and environmental protection groups. Thank you.
Yes.
Amazing work you're doing, Ed, and thanks again. I remember a couple years back at a League of Cities conference, cities were struggling with finding energy efficiency as it relates to lighting, and the city of LA was on the forefront of that discussion.
Yes.
And I know we've seen a significant amount of cost savings, and at the same time we're putting out wider, brighter lights. So with the cost savings on our energy efficiencies, I want to commend Ms. Brill, the CAO's office, with this refinance tool where we're going to see nearly 11% of the overall refinancing. It's $360,000 in present value savings that's going to go back to your department. Right. How do you plan on using those dollars?
Well, we have a lot of streetlights that are 60, 70, 80 years old, and we just don't have the funding today to replace them or paint them. All that money will be used to refurbish, replace some of the poles that are really old. Again, our approach is to be able to maintain the look of the communities with the old fixtures. So even if we decide to go ahead and replace the poles, it will be a replica of what was there. Sure. Those are the ones that are liability for the city. As far as we're concerned, if they're not falling and they're not a liability, we're going to make sure the look of the pole stays, and we just change the guts of the fixture inside. Even the fixture look will be the same. So, but the money is going to come back and do the rehabilitation of our aging infrastructure. We have some streetlights that date back to the early 90s. And Mr. Chair, today with 165,000, we are saving $8.5 million on electricity every year.
Yeah, good work.
That's so LED has been a really good solution for us to be able to sustain the assessments that we have throughout the city.
Thank you for that. Okay. Hearing no other comments, questions? I'll take this item, colleagues, and approve without objection. Okay, that will be the order. Thank you for that. Item number 2. Mr. Clerk.
Item 2, City Attorney Report and Ordinances relative to amending the Los Angeles Administrative Code to allow the Office of Contract Compliance to more efficiently administer equal employment practices, affirmative action, non-discrimination practices, equal benefits, first-source hiring, service contract worker retention, and living wage provisions.
Okay, we do have 3 speaker cards on this item. Before that, I want to bring up Mr. Reamer from Contract Administration. Come on up, sir. A lot of effort's been put into this ordinance before us as it relates to some of the best practices in the city of Los Angeles as it relates to affirmative action, non-discrimination practices, equal benefits. Also looking at first source hiring, service contract worker retention, and living wage ordinances. Can you share with us what we have before us?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. John Reamer, the Director of the Bureau of Contract Administration. What you have before you today is an ongoing effort to streamline contracting efforts in the city of Los Angeles. Many of the ordinances that you already alluded to are integrally tied to the contracting efforts that we have. There are requirements that the council has stated they want in place. And our goal here is to fix it so that we can move contracts a lot smoothly, easily through the process. One example would be the threshold where these contracts require the ordinances. We're asking that the threshold be moved to $25,000. In looking at just highlights for a few of the areas that we have before you, for the non-discrimination, equal employment, affirmative action, we're asking that we're now allowed to accept placing this standard requirement in the contract itself, which will eliminate having to submit it to us. So when the contract is signed, the policy itself will be acknowledged under service contractor worker retention. We noticed that the threshold for when the ordinance itself applied for certain workers, to be more specific, $15 an hour threshold was in place, and given our new minimum wage and living wage escalation, that quickly was going to eclipse being able to use this ordinance. So we're asking for that to be addressed under first source hire. CDD is no longer a department, but rather the Employment Workforce Development Department. So we are changing the definitions and acknowledgement of that. With equal benefits, again, the $25,000 threshold. And then the big one, living wage ordinance. Living wage, we have many changes that we are bringing before you, some of which deal with the Board of Public Works now serving as the public body where when we, BCA as the designated administrative agency, when we make a determination with respect to proprietary interests, that will be held publicly before the board for anyone to come and give comment to. We are responding to market rates in the industry. There is a request for an increase, and I also have that I would like to share with you an additional modification for that. And the background behind that is given the fact that we now have a minimum wage in the city of Los Angeles, we wanted to explore what other municipalities had a similar environment as we do.
Yeah, we're wondering how will it relate to the living wage ordinance? That's
most certainly. San Francisco is the area that relates most closely to us, where they have not only a minimum wage separate and apart from what you have in the state of California, but also a living wage, and how they governed the difference between the two. We explored the living wage rate that we have in the city of Los Angeles, comparing it to the state's minimum wage, and there was a delta that existed that was going to be threatened, and we wanted to make sure that we did not create an environment at the airport specifically that would cause certain industries and certain contractors to not be able to compete. In looking at San Francisco in the handout that you just received, you see the chart on the back that shows where San Francisco currently exists with respect to their living wage rate and their health benefits and the total package, and what we're recommending for a 3 consecutive year period. Why 3 years? Well, our ordinance currently has language in it that allows for the CEO and the CLA to do an examination of the ordinance itself and the impact that it may be having on businesses. So given the escalation that's going to be taking place with our minimum wage and the need to keep our living wage in line with the intent that the council had in place, we believe that this is an appropriate response to what we have. Another thing that has come before us is a concern over health care and compensated time off as it relates to how will it impact employees. In this ordinance, the DAA now has the authority to, on a case-by-case basis, review a request from any individual who might say, you know what, we have dual coverage in the sense that I have a certain health care need that I need to take care of. I'm covered under a parent, a significant other. This ordinance allows the DAA to look at those on an individual basis and to see whether or not that is indeed the case. And if it is, allow for a waiver for that individual. It will not allow for the person to receive the health care, what I would refer to as allowance, but it would take into consideration the fact that they have a certain or a special interest. In this ordinance, we are stating that health care as one time an item that was waivable in the sense that if there was an out-of-pocket cost, we're not allowing that any longer. And this is in response to the council's desire to ensure that all the employees have access to health care. The allowance is quite enticing, and if you, under the past language, if you were to have an out-of-pocket cost, then you could reject the health care offer and receive both the base rate as well as the allowance. So we're asking that that be eliminated. So those are just a few of the things that we have in place. Again, we believe that it's going to greatly impact our ability to move our efforts to streamline contracting. It's also going to clean up many of the areas in the ordinances that we need to address that have happened over a number of years.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Ms. Martinez.
I have several questions. So my first question is, so in the living wage ordinance amendments, there were new determinations that were made. And the way I understand it is that it states that determinations of coverage that would further the proprietary interest of the city will now be approved by the Board of Public Works. Who was it approved by before?
The past practice was for if an employer wanted to ask whether or not a particular task fell under the living wage ordinance, they would come to the DAA, the designated administrative agency, and then we would make the determination. That won't change. We will still do all of the due diligence to investigate, examine, and see whether or not, based on the work that's being performed, the ordinance applies. But to just clean things up and make things more transparent, we will then present in a board report to our Board of Public Works, and they will hear the item publicly. If there's someone that wants to come and comment, they can, to just officially affirm the designation.
And after it goes to the board, will it be coming to the council?
No. No,
After it goes to the board, what happens then? That's a determination?
That officially establishes it.
Okay. And then I had two other questions, one regarding the health care benefits, the health benefits. So while I understand that the intent to ensure that our employees have health care coverage, I wonder that by removing the waiver, are we forcing employees to potentially take inferior coverage or have double coverage in case their spouse or their partner is already covering their health insurance? I only ask this because this happened to me a couple of years ago where my husband's insurance was just so much better.
Right.
And so I chose to waive my insurance.
Right.
It made sense for our family. So I just want to get some clarification on this.
Sure,
one.
most certainly. I would say yes and no, but let me quickly go to no. It's not. One could come and say, as the example that you just gave, your spouse has health care and you have a provider that you need for a particular health challenge that you're dealing with. And if you had to take the health plan that your employer was providing you, you'd have to change providers and then you would not be covered. There's language now in our ordinance that says that you could present to the DAA your scenario, we could review it, and then we could, in essence, give you a waiver. Now, what would that waiver do? That waiver would allow your employer not to be held responsible for what would appear to be violating the living wage ordinance. The reason that we put this in place is because you have several instances where As you see with the chart, let's just take the city of LA as it currently sits, $4.87 an hour. So you could come and you could say, you know what, my spouse, my parent provides health care. I don't want the health care. I want the $4.80 an hour. The city of LA doesn't even do that. That's $4.87 an hour that you would now receive in your check because your significant other, your spouse or parent has coverage for you. As the current ordinance is asking, when we give the exemption, the DAA, you as the employee would not be eligible to receive the $4.80 an hour. So we would waive that employer having to provide you health care based on the fact that you have a special need, and you would be able to go and keep the same plan that you have, but you would not receive the $4.87 an hour.
Okay.
So you would not be impacted at all.
Okay. But there's still an option based on an individual basis to come before the board and make that and ask for that waiver.
They would not have to come to the board. They would come to us, the
come to
DAA, and yes, that option does exist. It's in the ordinance now. If that scenario does happen, and again, we're concerned that that would, without having that unique option, just a broad-based option, because there are those who would say, well, why don't you just give the option to the employer?
Right.
San Francisco has a unique and somewhat, it's a different situation where it's a city and county. So they have a relationship with the county that we don't enjoy with the County of Los Angeles with respect to when the employers there, under their ordinance, they have a base rate and they also have what I'm again refer to as an allowance for health care. The employer does one of two things. You either provide health care or you take that equivalent in dollars and you give it to the city, county, which in theory would go toward helping fund the healthcare, county healthcare system, that it's assumed that's where that individual might go if they didn't have healthcare. We don't have that here. So ours is to make sure that every employee gets healthcare because the $4.87 is very attractive. If someone had the option of saying, I'm going to select the one that has an out-of-pocket cost so that I can take the money, are we driving them toward health care? Yes, that's the intent of the ordinance, to make sure that every employee has access to health care. So, again, to be long-winded, purposely, for the scenario where you have a plan and you want to keep your plan and you can demonstrate to us, the DAA, that you have a plan, then there is a provision to exempt you from needing to have this health care and also your employer from being penalized for not providing you health care.
Got it. Okay. And then my last question, Mr. Chair, is under compensated and uncompensated time off. So the amendments to the living wage include a prohibition for employers to implement policies to count uncompensated time off as an absence. Do you think that we need language that would include employers setting up a policy on how you're supposed to request for time off? Do we need that kind of language?
The language that we currently have in place, it deals with compensated and uncompensated time off. And there has been a concern expressed with respect to how that is administered. Without going into details, I believe that we have room in our putting together our rules and regulations to have dialogue with the industry, for them to explain to us their thoughts on how they would implement when someone wants to utilize their compensated and non-compensated time off. What we are concerned about is someone being penalized, disciplined, or quite frankly terminated because they choose to use their compensated and uncompensated time off. So now the question becomes, what's appropriate? What's fair? Do you have to call in 3 days in advance? Do you have to call in a minute before your shift begins? Somewhere in between there is a conversation that can be held so as to clearly clarify what is acceptable with respect to what you want to use this for. We all want to ensure that the airlines and all those that provide services at the airport have the staff that they need to get the work done. It's a security issue. We get that. It's a service delivery issue. We get that. Our ordinance is proprietary based, so we want to make sure that the service is provided in a way that does not unduly impact the traveling public. So that's a conversation that could take place. I don't believe it needs to be embodied in the ordinance. I believe it can be handled in the rules and regs.
And so it also says that the employer may not take any other adverse action against the employee. So if employees abuse the system, is a write-up or putting something in their personnel file, is that considered an adverse action?
So that's the language that I'm believing we can, and I have the city attorney here to help me out, but to save time, I won't necessarily have them come up. We will have this conversation with them. I'm believing that we can clarify adverse action, discipline in our rules and regs, because if we put that in the ordinance, our ordinance is going to get very thick. And the purpose of the rules and regs is to help bring about some clarity with respect to how we will administer and what certain things mean. We do not have the luxury of exceeding the intent nor the written authority given in the rules and regs. I mean, in the ordinance itself, we don't. But we can clarify what a word means in our rules and regs and how we will apply it. So we are hearing the industry's concern. We get that. And we're hoping they're hearing ours as well. And so now the conversation can take place with respect to, in our rules and regs, clarifying what we mean and also what they mean, so we can make sure that we have a good understanding.
So you feel like we don't need additional language? You can deal with the industry?
I believe we're fine, but if we do need additional language, we will certainly come back to you.
Okay. I was thinking maybe we could say something like any other unreasonable adverse action, because I completely understand that the airport lacking support staff could impact safety and the ability to actually deliver services. I understand that. I just want to make, I didn't quite, by reading this, didn't understand whether there was a written process by which people were supposed to ask for time off and what the adverse action was going to be.
Different employers are going to handle it different ways.
But do you feel comfortable having that conversation directly with the industry?
I do.
If we need to adopt additional language, it would come back to us.
Yes, okay. Yes, that's my pledge.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question about the waiver versus an opting out of the health insurance, health benefits. Mm-hmm. Can you clarify that?
So why don't I read this? It says, nothing in this article shall limit the right of the DAA to waive the provisions herein with respect to and at the request of an individual employee who is eligible for benefits under a health plan in which the employee's spouse, domestic partner, or parent is a participant or subscriber to another health plan, and the employee is not allowed by that plan or the employer's health plan to obtain benefits under both plans, even on a coordinated basis. An employee who received this waiver shall not be entitled to the hourly rate without health benefits pursuant to Section 1037.2. So you come to me and you say, look, I need to have this health care plan under the provider that my parent has or my spouse has. And you give us the information to support your request. We're going to consider it, and if everything is what you say it is, then we're going to grant it. Now you come back to me a week later and you say, hold on, I'm not being paid enough money. What do you mean? Well, I should be compensated the base rate for living wage as well as the health care component because I need that money. Well, no. What the waiver will do is the waiver will say you have health care coming from another source. Therefore, you do not have access to the allowance, and your employer is not going to be held liable for not complying with the ordinance. We will look at that payroll and we will say the employer's fine because they're paying the base rate, and coupled with the base rate is a request that was submitted and approved by our office to allow you to get health care from another source based on the reasons you gave. So that's what the waiver would be.
We offer our city employees an opt-out option.
We do.
Today, right?
Yes, we do.
Because when my wife worked for the school district,
yes.
I opt out. In fact, we had almost
yes.
identical insurance, health coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And we got $50 per pay period of a cash in lieu.
Is it a pay period or month?
Or a month, whatever.
Pay period.
I don't remember. But why aren't we putting that also on the table for this ordinance before us? If we're allowing city employees to opt out, why aren't we allowing these employees to opt out?
Because the one thing that we don't have is an agreed upon what would that amount be. Clearly $4.87 per hour, given the number of hours they work, is going to exceed $50 very fast. And for us, the amount in the ordinance is what, through studies, we've been told is the equivalent amount to support a health care plan for, say, a family of 4. We want to maintain a level playing field. We want to make sure that every employer who's competing for a contract, they understand what their costs are going to be. So you're going to have the base rate for that employee and the health care component, and it's consistent across the board. There will be, as it's been discussed, scenarios where an individual is going to request, based on their unique circumstance, to keep their own health plan that they're obtaining because of a reason. And we've attempted to outline the reasons. You have a certain need. I hesitate to say it's a convenience thing, and that we're presenting a hypocritical approach to this, because I don't want to imply that at all. The goal, as we understand it, the intent of council is to make sure that every employee has health care. And this drives that to make sure that it happens. So we're taking the assumption that you don't have that parent, you don't have that spouse, you don't have that significant other that's going to provide you health care. And for those individuals who do, then what's the unique scenario that says, I'd rather be on their plan? It could very well be they might want to be on your plan. We won't know any of that. So our approach has been the assumption that employee does not have access to health care. They do not have anyone that provides it for them. And this does through living wage. And in the event that there is a unique situation where someone does have it already, and what they have provides something that they cannot get anywhere else, this language now says we acknowledge that, we take that in consideration, and we're willing to allow you to keep what you have and not hold your employer responsible.
Understood. Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Rimmer, for your efforts on behalf of giving us a little more clarity. I know the city attorney is doing a great job. I have two questions, though. On the first source
Yes.
Provisions, again, I know something's very, very important, especially in some of the neighborhoods that we're representing. In the first section A, 10.442.2A on page 2, there's a reference to contractor or subcontractor will notify EWDD of specific employment opportunities at least 7 days. So where does that information go? How is it used? What happens then? I mean, you're checking zip codes, you're checking addresses, or what's the...
No, the concept behind the first source hire is to provide the city first right of refusal. The notion would be you are receiving a contract from the city of Los Angeles and you need to hire. So it's not suggesting that you need to lay off anyone, but you are going to hire. In doing so, because you're going to hire individuals that you don't know, sight unseen, give the work source system the first opportunity to provide you these individuals. Behind the scenes, they've already been working, putting a pipeline in place to provide avenues, if you will, for individuals who, yes, they could very well be city residents, to work on city contracts. To prevent delaying the process, we attach the 7 days. So in other words, the city system needs to be robust, healthy, oiled, and ready to go. In 7 days, if we can't provide you a name or names based on the work that's going to take place as identified in the contract, then that contractor is able to go wherever else they want to go. So that's what the ordinance is saying. It's saying you give the city system first right of refusal to assist you in meeting your employment needs. That information is communicated to our office and EWDD, and they're responding to it, and hopefully we have individuals that can take advantage of it. If we don't, after the 7-day period, the contractors complied and they're able to move forward, and if they can hire someone somewhere else, then they can do that.
So how do we guard against the good faith, well, not good faith efforts, good fake efforts, when, so the employer says, okay, they've given us first opportunity, first refusal, they screen 10, and they still choose whom they'd like to choose. Are there any teeth in here that, in terms of that first source?
Well, there are no direct teeth.
Pardon?
There are no direct teeth. No, there's no direct teeth. Good fake, I've heard it heard. What I would say is part of the streamlining, including Bavin, which I've shared with you, is to move the information as quickly as we can. So that when we know there is a contract opportunity, the departments that are going to be involved in the process are alerted to this. They're moving on this. If the employer does not utilize names, I would imagine that individuals will give feedback as to how well it worked for them. We have other ordinances that could come into play, and that's why I say no direct teeth, but indirect direct teeth, such as the Contractor Responsibility Ordinance, Contractor Performance Evaluation Ordinance, where we're able to take a look and examine and give grades to how well contractors did on our contracts. That can be used as a determining factor as to whether or not we contract with them again. So there are no hard, direct penalties involved, as much as we want to work with you and hopefully you want to work with us. We've done our due diligence to identify individuals that are able and ready to work. Here they are, give them a chance. It's worked fairly well at the airport. They have a lot more opportunities there. And we're believing with Bavin and the streamlining that it will pick up some steam and do better in the council control departments.
Well, again, I hope it will as well. It is important, and it should be more than just lip service. We want to see some results. Similarly, under enforcement, section 10.44.8, is there any proactive enforcement, or are we just kind of enforcing complaints once they're brought to our attention? Was there any spot checking, or what occurs in this enforcement piece? Again, what are the teeth?
No, the majority of these ordinances are complaint driven, and if we don't receive a complaint, we won't know that they're not working as we would like. We believe that Bavin will help that, and you'll hear probably every other word come out of my mouth be Bavin. The business assistance.
How will Bavin help? And I have heard that, and I like it.
The business assistant virtual network, because where we want Bavin to ultimately go is create. Let me erase that word. Enhance our contracting process with greater transparency. So that everyone is aware that a contract exists. Everyone is aware that an opportunity is available. That everyone is aware that information has been requested. And then ultimately, we will be looking for a response as it relates to how it went. So when the names are provided to that employer, of the names that were provided, how many did you choose? How many did you utilize? How many actually received work? These are things that in our desire to have data and use data to drive decisions, this is a tool that can greatly enhance our ability to do that. So that won't just
those are all good questions, not to cut you off. Those are all good questions. Are they mandatory? Are they optional?
Well,
people can respond if they want to.
That part is not mandatory. That part will happen, and I don't want to say naturally, but that part starts here. It starts with these ordinances all being amended to allow us to use them in the Bavin process, and then once we're dumping them, for lack of a better word, feeding them into the Bavin process, now we have the ability to take a look and see. Currently, we don't have a process in place to know when and where and how and if it's taking place. We just put the language in the contract. There is an expectation for that contractor to comply, but there's nothing in place for us to see this is in play, this is indeed taking place. Bobbin is going to give us eyes to see that this is happening. I would imagine you're going to have many departments that will stay, that having information without eyes to look at it doesn't do you any good, and I get that. But I don't want to say baby steps, but this is the first step for a journey that we believe that will be successful and prosperous.
I hope you're right. It's very important, and transparency is everything. Being able to determine whether or not programs are working the way they're supposed to work makes a big difference. Similarly, Mr. Chairman, if I can, just one other question here on the non-discrimination piece, another issue that has many people concerned. At the bottom, the third paragraph, you reference awarding authority shall provide immediate notification here to the Office of Contract Compliance. And the office is going to be notified of any immediate announcement of bid. Again, what happens to this information? What are you doing with it, and how does it assist in
I'm
our
sorry, you're reading from where?
Page 1 on the non-discrimination employment section.
Okay.
And referencing the third paragraph, each awarding authority shall provide immediate notification upon award of each contract by the awarding authority to the Office of Contract Compliance. And just the question is, so what happens to that data? What do you do with that information? How does it help to allay concerns that there is non-discrimination occurring?
Well, again, council member, the Bobbin will facilitate our immediately knowing. We don't always know that now because things are done manually, more so than electronically. And our knowing about a contract opportunity will not allow us to have privy to whether or not discriminatory practices are taking place. That, again, is going to be a complaint-driven issue. What is key is communicating to the employer, that contractor, and making sure that they provide at the work site the appropriate posters and information that communicates to their employees if something happens, this is who you can call. So we're working hard to ensure that that takes place. Part of that effort, a lot of that effort, is surrounding our minimum wage, as we're going to now be dealing with employers that are not just contracting with the city, but employers inside of the geographical footprint of the city. Again, educating and informing the employees of their rights and where they can go in case they have an issue that arises. When the complaints come, then we go through our normal investigative process with respect to receiving them, validating them for merit, and then investigating to see what the issue might be and how it can be resolved.
Well, again, I appreciate the efforts to track this data a little more precisely than we have in the past. And I think we all agree our challenge is trying to make the pie bigger and trying to level the playing field. And so hopefully these ordinances will do both of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. With that, Mr. Reamer, thanks for your presentation. We're going to go to speaker cards. I have 3 cards on item number 2. If I can welcome Len Sloper, followed by Victor Mena, and the last speaker would be Marx Gutierrez. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Buscaiano and council members. I am Len Sloper. I'm Executive Director of the Airline Service Providers Association. I have some prepared comments I want to make, but there's some new language that you guys are kicking around today that we have not seen yet, so we're going to have to sort of take a step back and hopefully get a chance to look at it, and it may address some of our concerns, it may not, but some new stuff to us this morning. Earlier today, your office has received a letter from the LAX Airline Airport Affairs Committee, and myself requesting the committee to consider 2 recommendations and changes for the ordinance, living wage ordinance anyway. As you can see from our standpoint, we are good with BCA's recommendations on the vast majority of changes with the living wage ordinance. We did some work with BCA trying to understand them better, and I think we came to a good understanding of what they were trying to do, and we're in agreement with them. But 2 issues, and the president of ASPA, Victor Mena, is with us, and he has sort of another part of this, so if it's okay to have him follow me, it'd make more sense. I'm going to talk about the healthcare piece just for a second. The BCA is recommending removal of language that currently allows an employee to waive health care benefits if it requires an employee to have an out-of-pocket expense in obtaining those benefits. We'd like that language to remain in the ordinance now, or we recommend the city embrace the quality standards program at San Francisco that San Francisco International Airport uses. The QSP is a minimum standard for health care that all employers must offer to all employees. Similar to the Affordable Care Act, it's very close to a bronze Affordable Care Act package, and it allows employees to opt out if they can prove to their employer that they have other insurance that's better or different or somehow they like it better. They're allowed to opt out of the employer program that QSP requires. If the city chooses not to adopt the minimum standards approach, we ask that you simply allow an employee to continue to have the option to opt out if they can prove that they have other insurance.
Thank you. A question for you, if I can keep you up for 1 second. So, from what I heard from Mr. Reamer, employees would still be able to quote unquote opt out, but they'd have to seek the waiver. Is that not? Isn't
that's
that
new language we heard today. That's not what was in the living wage ordinance proposal we saw last week. So I can't comment to that introduction of a waiver as it exists today in the ordinance.
Would you be opposed to that effort?
I'd like to see what it is, but generally speaking, our whole goal here is to allow the employees to have the most options that fit for their lifestyle given the circumstances that right. They've got.
So that makes sense. Mr. Reamer, can you respond to that? I mean, with the waiver in place in this amendment that's proposed here, you're still allowing the employee to go through the process through EEA and seek the waiver for health care benefits. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
That is my understanding.
Right. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. The ordinance affords.
And they have to prove that they have coverage from a spouse or a partner.
Right. They need to give us the documentation. Similar to, I don't want to compare it too closely to what we have here in the city, but we as a DAA would want them to come to us.
I had to do the same with my wife. With my wife, who had benefits with the school district, I had to prove that she had benefits.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Victor Mena, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Buscaino and council members. I'd like to thank Len Sloper for his comments and also Mr. Reamer for his comments on these issues. My name is Victor Mena. I'm currently serving as president of the Airline Service Providers Association. And I'd like to address the second recommendation that was that is being suggested. The proposed language on the second issue reads, an employer may not implement any employment policy to count uncompensated time off taken under this article as an absence that may result in discipline, discharge, suspension, or any other adverse action. We request that this language be deleted. The service providers have no issues with our employees receiving 12 compensated days off per year and 10 uncompensated days off per year as required by the LWO. The language being proposed will allow employees to randomly take days off without following any attendance policies in place to guarantee service levels and standards are achieved that provide the safest and most secure travel experience for passengers at LAX. Without properly staffing wheelchair assistants, terminal security guards, cabin cleaning crews to the appropriate levels and others, to the appropriate levels and timely, passengers will be unnecessarily put at risk. Proper attendance policies are essential to ensure the passenger's health, well-being, and safety. Our organizations have worked diligently to review the proposed amendments since hearing of them in early December of 2015. We respectfully request that the committee to adopt our recommendations as you consider the BCA's proposal.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Mark Gutierrez, our final speaker on item number 2. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Council members. Marks Gutierrez, SEIU, USWW, here supporting all of the amendments. We feel that these amendments give BCA the tools to enforce the living wage ordinance. We've had several instances of wage theft, one even totaling up to almost $1 million about a year ago. We feel that these amendments give BCA the tools to go after some of these wage thieves. We also support reasonable increases in the living wage ordinance that was just proposed by staff today. One small piece about the healthcare portion of it, a waiver, just a blanket, exception, so folks can opt out and get a third, that's a really big amount, get a third of their money back, is a really big incentive for folks to find ways to opt out of the healthcare. And I think that you have to look back at originally the intention of council was to cover as many folks as possible who are working at the airport. Folks that work at the airport actually need the best healthcare possible, considering the amount of pollution that they're exposed to, considering the amount of passengers that they're exposed to on a daily basis. Thank you, and just about that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to our speakers. Mr. Clerk, when is this planning on heading to council? Do we have a date on that?
Councilman, a date for council has not yet been set.
Okay. This is just in our committee, right? Mr. Reamer, can you just respond to the ASPA's concerns that they have not seen these amendments?
Which amendments?
The ones that you submitted. That's the letter here you submitted. The letter here.
Right, the letter that I gave you today it's an extension of increases.
And you haven't shared this with industry?
Excuse me?
You haven't shared this with the association?
When I say extensions, I'm sorry, I want to clarify. Part of what's in that letter is already embodied in what's before you today. There's 1 year added to that they probably have not seen. Okay. Other than that, there's nothing else that's in the letter.
Can you respond to the fact that they have were not aware of a waiver?
Well, that is in.
Is that new?
No, that's not new. That's actually in the language. I printed down off of the council file this morning all of the ordinances, and that is indeed there. So that's in place. They may have missed it, and we didn't discuss it in detail when we met. But they've held to the spirit of the conversation we had when we met. But that's not new. That's been in place.
Okay, appreciate that. Colleagues, anything else? You good? Okay. I would like to afford them the opportunity to sit down with you and maybe hold this until, what's our next scheduled meeting? Is this a time-sensitive issue, this one before us, this item before us?
It is, in the sense that we are really working hard to move our contracting streamlining. Okay.
But before it goes to council, what's the council agenda like?
Council members, committee members, your next scheduled meeting is March 14th. Be advised that council will be in recess the week of March 7th.
NLC, right?
So you have next week for council or the following week.
What's the projected date that this goes to council? I know you mentioned that it's not on the...
It could go next week with your instruction,
okay.
Or we could wait for the week after the recess, which would be the week of the 14th.
Okay. Let's see the week of March 1st. Let's get this to council and gives ASPA an opportunity to sit down with you before it gets to council within the next week or so. With the amendments, Dennis reminds me that it still has to come through council regardless. Come through committee regardless, right?
Got it.
After council.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it gives them an opportunity to sit at the table with you to express some concerns.
Okay, so can we move forward?
So we'll move forward on any objection to this moving forward? Okay, we have a motion and a second. And, okay, Mr. Price, thank you, and a second. So we'll move this to council unanimously without objection. And as I'm reminded, even with these amendments, it'll come back to us after the direction of the council. And it also gives us an opportunity to sit down with ASPA and have them offer their concerns moving forward.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you.
That'll be the order.
Committee members, just to verify, you're approving the ordinances that are before you and the proposed modifications presented by the Bureau of Contract Administration today?
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. That'll be adopt the language submitted in this letter here, submitted by Mr. Raymer.
Thank you, sir.
That'll be the order. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, let's know we're on a timeline. I want to listen to let's hear item number 6, and then we'll move on to item number 6. If you can read that into the record, please. Yes.
Item 6, Bureau of Sanitation to report relative to the status of protocols and procedures for the implementation of LAMC 56.11 regarding the storage of personal property in public areas pursuant to council action of November 17th, 2015.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Colleagues, the unchecked proliferation of personal property in our public spaces is creating a public safety and public health hazard. Tents are erected on public sidewalks during daytime hours, are creating an environment where narcotic sales and prostitution can be disguised from the police, and drug overdose victims go unnoticed. We must start enforcing 5611, and that cannot happen until these protocols are complete. Item before us gives us an update on the ongoing efforts to set protocols in place. I believe if we continue to delay on 5611, we are doing a disservice to the most vulnerable people in our city and those who are living out in the streets. If we continue to allow these encampments and tents to be erected, we are preventing the resources from touching all these individuals who need the most help. I'd like to ask sanitation to come up. Mr. Martinez is here, I believe. Leo? Steve is here right now. Oh, thank you so much, as well as
Good afternoon.
Officer Berrigan. Can you give us a status of the protocols? I understand a few of my colleagues want to see these protocols in place prior to the ordinance coming before council. This council file is also directed to the Homeless and Poverty Committee. But I feel that we're not acting with a sense of urgency on these protocols in a time where we're continuing to see the proliferation of these tent cities appear at all corners of our city. Now, what's the status of the protocols, and when will they be ready for council review? And the council action directing a development of these protocols was directed 3 months ago, and yet we have not seen anything come before us. Why is it taking so long? Obviously, this is a crisis situation. My last question is, what can we do to speed up the process?
All right, thank you, Councilmember. Yes, we are reviewing the protocols. There's several areas that are areas of concern to us. We are developing the process and the whole procedures in a manual. I think they're just about complete, but I would turn over to Steve, who's actually working on the manual himself, so he could bring you up to speed on some of the issues.
Mr. Peterson, thank you for joining us.
Yes, Steve Pedersen, Bureau of Sanitation. I'm Chief Environmental Officer with Watershed Protection Division. Also, I'd like to introduce Officer Barrega, who's going to help assist in updating you on the draft protocols that we are developing for the implementation of 5611.
Thank you. Just note also, colleagues, we're also joined by LAPD captains from Central Area, Captain Orb, if you have any questions for Captain Orb as well. Okay.
We've been working very hard on developing over the past few months the draft protocol. We've been working with the mayor's office, LAPD, with CLA's office, CLO's office, and a number of the council districts. We have the development of the protocols is a very complicated issue in that there are a number of scenarios we have to go through to effectively develop a successful protocol. In addition, we also have to determine resources that will be required, and we're hoping to, we asked for 90 days after the adoption. We're hoping to have it done and completed a lot faster than that, but we need the time to properly vet the protocols with all the different agencies involved.
Now, the fact that we don't have the ordinance in place, is that hindering the progress?
I would say yes, because...
So you would prefer to have a 5611 ordinance in place before you present protocols?
Right. Right, exactly.
I think we got the same direction from the city attorney last time we heard this in this committee.
Because we don't know what the final 5611 will look like.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense. Ms. Martinez, you have something?
So you're coming up with protocols based on the recommendations from this. Are you preparing protocols based on what, since we don't have an ordinance in place? Is it based on version B, which is what we voted on a couple of weeks ago in this committee? It's my understanding, I mean, unless I have the process wrong, you first adopt an ordinance and then you begin working on protocols.
Right. We began a few months ago writing on the protocols that we had for the then 5611 that's on the books now. And then there were a series...
So that's what you're drafting protocols on?
But then, no. We've added based on the amendments that have come down to us. So we're working on according to the amendments that we have received.
And you'll be done when? Are those protocols going to be back before us, Mr. Chair?
I believe it's heading to homeless and poverty first.
The protocols goes to them first and then they come back to us?
Well, I believe we would like to have 90 days from the adoption of the final 5611 that we submit the final draft protocols.
Well, it seems to me that this committee has more sense of urgency, so I'd like to see the protocols come here first, since we're the ones who already voted on an initial ordinance.
It's not fair for you. Obviously, this council is divided on 5611. We need to embrace and accept the fact that there are colleagues on the council that want to have issues with 5611 as it stands today, and other colleagues of ours want to see it amended, as was the direction of this committee moving forward. So I know you're getting torn. Clearly you're getting torn, which is not fair for our city folks who are putting together these protocols. I'm in constant communication with our colleagues, Marquise Harris-Dawson, as well as Jose Huizar, co-chairs of the Homeless and Poverty Committee. They, too, want to see protocols in place before an ordinance. Ms. Flores is here, City Attorney's Office. That was the direction, or the comment she made to us. It's hard to put together protocols without having an ordinance in the books. So. And in the meantime, we're hearing the frustrations, the concerns from all parts of the city as it relates to the public spaces, the tent cities, the fact that our service providers cannot get to these individuals to offer them housing and resources. We're hearing from law enforcement as well of the ongoing crime uptick in just specific parts of the city. We just heard in committee and public safety from Chief Beck. He attended my LA Crime Forum in San Pedro and has attributed the uptick in crime to some of the homeless issues that are facing this city. And I feel, based on my experience as an LAPD officer, even as a reserve today, is that we have those who are most vulnerable being taken advantage of by drug dealers, sex trafficking issues, ongoing domestic violence that are occurring within these tents and these encampments. And we're doing a disservice to those individuals who are living on the streets by allowing them to have these tents and encampments erected during the day. So I'm just as frustrated as you are. We're just as frustrated as you are. We need to move forward and get this ordinance in place so that we can direct our city agencies to provide the services that they need to provide and be responsive to the residents and the businesses who are struggling with this issue. Mr. Price, then Mr. O'Farrell.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. We need to have a greater sense of urgency, and I'm concerned too that we're not kind of moving forward on both tracks to try to make some differences. I know that sanitation has been doing a great job under some real terrible resources and circumstances, and we appreciate your help in District 9 specifically. But we just got to do more. We got to do better. We certainly would appreciate being a part of that discussion. I know we've met with you in lots of other areas, but if 9 could be a part of this discussion in terms of these protocols, that would be very useful. And I'm curious, you certainly mentioned almost everybody in the city family that's involved in this discussion. Do we have the advocates at the table too? Or are we sort of put this together and then we present it to them? Or do we kind of know what they want and so we're not talking to them? Or what's the role that the advocates are playing in this process?
Gonzalo Barriga, Environmental Compliance Officer, Sanitation. At this time, there's a committee formed by the mayor's office. The only one at the table, I believe, that might fit that description might be LASA. The rest is based solely on the amendments that were presented to sanitation and that kind of working group. So at this time, we're working with whatever is being handed to us, and we're trying to make a protocol that might fit that language.
All right. Well, again, appreciate it if you would include District 9 as a part of that. Those council officers that are involved in this discussion, this specific discussion, be appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your verbal report. We absolutely must get the ordinance adopted, and we must work out the protocol. I just have a comment. Being at this now, several of us, for a little over 2 years, 2 years, 7 months now, I think a certain psychology has settled in, and where we are sometimes neurotic about it. We have to act. We simply have to act. There's too much confusion. There's too much uncertainty, I think, in terms of messaging from city leadership. I spent a lot of time with the LAPD on a Saturday at a summit, and everyone from the deputy chiefs to the daily patrol officers, the SLOs, sergeants, lieutenants, everyone, this psychology that I mentioned has manifested itself into mixed signals on how to approach this. But I just want to state declaratively, no one on this council, no one in this committee, no one in city leadership wants to see us in the business of criminalizing the homeless or having a punishing approach to our homelessness crises. We want to see solutions, and I think this committee has done a lot of work in we've had great conversations on how to deal with that. Sometimes our approach to these homeless encampments that are so deeply entrenched in many of our neighborhoods is somewhat Pollyanna, and we don't want to deal honestly with the root causes of what keeps individuals homeless. And then our reluctance then to enforce 5611 causes us to actually not deal with the issue whatsoever. And I could give you example after example in my own district of how my team and I have interacted with these encampments. And we have to figure out how to, we need to land on the right protocol for 5611. We need to have enforcement, and we need to compel the overwhelming majority of the individuals who have serious, deep addiction issues and mental health issues to get them to accept the services that we offer them every single day. So it's just more of a comment than anything else. I think we have to collectively, as a council, move beyond our fears, if you will, our reluctance because we're afraid to get something wrong, and we have to move forward because I think not just the homeless individuals themselves that need a helping hand, but our neighborhoods who are afflicted with a byproduct of it by witnessing prostitution in the open air and drug sales and exchange in the open air and dangerous situations which are sometimes right next to a residential area within a few steps. So I think there's a broad expectation from the public at large that we do something about it, and people are losing their patience. I know I'm losing my patience with it. So I just want to express my sentiment, and I don't think anyone on the council, we might have minor differences, but I think we're all on the same page, essentially. And we have to work through those little issues and get this thing up and adopted, and then the protocol in place expediently.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. We also need to recognize the ongoing efforts between the city and the county on a long-term strategy on getting more housing out there, wraparound services. But it's not that's not going to happen overnight. We need to do everything we can to touch those souls tonight. And I believe 5611 plays a big role on impacting more lives that we can to ensure that these people get back on these individuals get back on their feet. Mr. Rue?
Mr. Chair, I just want to concur with my colleagues and what everyone has stated. Regardless of where we stand, and actually we're in unison in majority of 5611. It's just one small little piece that we might have a disagreement on, but nevertheless, as Councilmember O'Farrell said, I think it's an urgent matter, and I completely support my colleagues and your request in making this an urgency and making this draft ordinance come before us as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Rue. And just to piggyback on what you said, it's 5611, make sure we have an enforcement arm behind it. So I think that disagreement is to enforce or not to enforce. If you're going to be lawless in the city of Los Angeles, you need to be held accountable for the lawlessness. I mean, just go to the Facebook page, Saving San Pedro, where someone just posted a female, naked, undressed female, bathing herself at an outdoor car wash, who is high as a kite. I mean, this is happening in all parts of our city. And that's the frustration that we have as a body here moving forward. Mr. Martinez?
Yes, I just want to say, either Councilman and Councilwoman, the frustration is along with us as well. We are trying as best as possible to process the encampments and clean them as well. My staff out in the field is torn because there's two 5611s. The protocols that we're actually writing for two versions. We're not sure which ones or the second one's going to be implemented. So there have been many times when my staff has been out in the field and it's a tough position to put my staff in because we're not sure exactly where we are and where we stand with regard to 5611.
How many ECOs we have today working on the ground here in the city?
We have, in addition to Steve's staff, we have 3 strike teams, it's about 30 people cleaning, but then the inspectors, I'm not sure you can speak.
Are there environmental compliance officers that are needed for the posting and the cleanup?
Well, we have, as I mentioned last session, 16, but then it's divided. All the other responsibilities we have for mandated programs that we have through the state.
Court-ordered cleanups in Venice and Skid Row, right?
We have that, and then we also have an industrial commercial inspection program. We have a illicit discharge program. So in actuality, would you say we have about 8 for the homeless encampments? About 6. 6 for the homeless encampments that are dedicated.
6 for the city dedicated to the homeless encampment cleanups.
Right.
That's a crime in itself. So my office hired ECOs on Saturday in response to some business and residents in the downtown San Pedro area. We posted the 24-hour posted. We had ERT out there reaching out, touching these souls, and making sure that they have the resources necessary. ECOs come out with the ERT, LASA, and LAPD, clear out the sidewalks, and within a matter of one day, the following day, the sidewalk again was taken over by these individuals. How many ECOs would you say that you would need citywide to address these cleanup efforts?
How many would you say? 18. We'll address it.
All right. I think there's a couple of different scenarios we need to take into effect into this position we need to place. First is just major cleaning. We probably need about 12 to 16 dedicated staff just to do scheduled planned cleaning and CDs. If we take the enforcement procedure or the immediate cleanups regarding 24-hour postings and ADA violations, so forth like that, you probably need another 18 people citywide to address with like a rapid response team to address these immediate health concerns, ADA, egress, stuff like that. So talking about 36.
36 or so, got it. Okay. The frustration continues. This is obvious. It's a status of protocols and procedures for the implementation of 5611 is continuing. I understand you're being. There's also a task force that's in place that's meeting with various council offices. That they're giving input on these protocols as well.
Well, we're continuing to meet with the mayor's office, and in fact, we're setting up a meeting next week with the mayor's office, and there are council districts that are invited. We will try to get out to the other council districts that are not part of the working task force.
Got it. Well, we're running out of time and patience, so I believe its direction unanimously is to continue to press forward and get these protocols in place. Love to, encourage my colleagues, the Homelessness and Poverty Committee, to move forward on the ordinance, get it to council floor, and wherever it may lie, move forward and get these protocols in place so we can be responsive to the most vulnerable in our city and be responsive to those residents and businesses who are struggling with this issue. So thank you very much. And I want to thank Ms. Flores, who's here, representing the City Attorney's Office. Thanks for your presence and tuning in here. With that, I have speaker cards on item number 6. If I can bring up Robin Doino. Pete White, please come forward. Steve Diaz. These 3 speakers, please come forward. Welcome.
Chairman Busciano, council members, thank you. I have 2 simple points to make. The first one is that a storage element of this is essential. It's an essential quality of life issue for people that are experiencing homelessness. Secondly, a storage capability does a great deal to prevent blight in the community. Those are my 2 very simple points.
Thank you, sir. Pete White, please come forward. Good afternoon. Steve Diaz, and the last speaker on this item is K-E-I. Cannot read last name. Sorry. Mr. White, welcome.
Good afternoon. So you speak of resources and intimate that said resources are not reaching those intended, but you never include the empirical fact that there are not nearly enough resources of any kind, namely housing across all levels. You speak of moving 5611 forward rapidly because we owe it to the poor and houseless. However, you stop short of stating this is in fact another tool to criminalize houseless people. You keep lifting the tools that LAPD needs to do its job. However, there is nothing said about the tools Angelenos need to live and thrive. You continue to link houselessness as criminal and a reason that crime is going up. That is political dog whistle, racist in nature, and places our city at risk of losing federal resources. As can be witnessed daily, criminalization is happening, and in fact has reached a fever pitch. This is happening illegally, and a toolbox full of ordinances and laws are on the books. We should lose our patience with a broken practice of criminalization and losing lawsuits. We should stop doing the same thing expecting different results. House keys, not handcuffs, is the only ways to solve this problem. We are very clear. I would say look up. I would say look out. I would say get out of those leather chairs. I would say to you, Price, come down to Skid Row and see how we're using watershed management to go in and dispossess people of their property. Criminalization is happening. We said it wasn't happening. I'm saying to you on the record, it continues to happen, and 5611 is nothing more but another layer of that criminalization that continues to put us at risk of federal resources. If you are going to legislate, do it humanely and using empirical data, not using the ostrich approach of sticking your head in the sand. and giving LAPD, your former bosses, what they want, to banish poor people from our streets. Thank you.
Mr. Diaz.
I too myself am tired. I'm tired of coming back to committee after committee because the same few council agendas continue to run wild through city council. Where do you expect a person to go if there is nowhere to go? If you're spending money on taking a person's tent down instead of spending money into the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, maybe there's an issue at that point. If you're spending money on trying to identify new quote-unquote officers for street services, but yet at the same time, there's little less money going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, where is it that you're going to put a person, and where's the person going to go home? Yeah, the issue is out of control. The issue is out of control because Los Angeles is one of the most unaffordable cities. The issue is out of control because this city refuses to take action to properly address homelessness. The reason why that lady you saw was out there taking a shower was because she didn't have a place to call home. She didn't have a place to go. So let's start fooling ourselves and let's stop saying that we're helping people by throwing them in front of an interaction with a police officer. Because as we all know, an interaction with a police officer is most likely going to lead to handcuffs and not a bed.
Unfortunately, she declined resources. We know who she is. Mr. Kay, is it? Thank you.
I'm a human rights activist.
The mic closer to your... There you go. Yes, sir.
I'm a human rights activist with LA Can and Stop LAPD spying and other human rights issues. I try to support all human rights issues. Your item 6 on the 5611 states that storage of personal property in public areas, I take to mean storage of homeless' personal property in public storage areas, because that's what the 5611 is about. The homeless personal property are largely human rights necessity: clothes, sleeping facilities, shelters, food, hygiene, communication devices. They don't have a toilet right there, you know. So their situation is not like they're in their own housing, which is a necessity. 5611 and the proposed agenda is meant to criminalize the homeless, especially the Skid Row homeless population, which Department of Public Works refers to on a map I saw in Little Tokyo as the warehouse district, as if Skid Row does not exist, as if there is no Skid Row homeless population. Abolish 5611 and the amendment. Stop criminalizing black homeless people. Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, sir. Okay, no action on this agenda item. And to respond to Ms. Martinez's comment about making sure the protocols come to this committee, which they will once it gets hashed out in homelessness and poverty, gets to the council, then comes back to both respective committees. So thank you for the presentation. No action on item number 3. And now with our final item, item number 3.
No, 6, I believe. You're now on item 3, which is motion of Farrell Rue relative to instructing the Bureau of Street Services with the assistance of the CAO and any other relevant departments to report on current protocols for inspection and enforcement of both permitted and unpermitted tree pruning and removal.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to defer to the maker of this motion, Mr. O'Farrell, to take the lead on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going from one topic with a protocol issue to another topic with a protocol issue. In late December, between Christmas and New Year's, there was an act of vandalism by a billboard company in Silver Lake, right near the plaza, the Sunset Triangle Plaza. And it was learned after this act of vandalism that 9 trees were trimmed, if that's what you want to call it. They were basically hacked, 3 of them to the point of being destroyed. And these were 9 beautiful trees with a beautiful canopy that had been developing over the last handful of years. And it was learned in pretty short order that it was the particular billboard company that hired a contractor to do the job, and it was all done without a single permit, which is a violation of the law. My office responded, and we held a meeting with constituents who were affected by this in the community of Silver Lake. And to the credit of this particular company, they did make some commitment to mitigate what they had done. And that conversation is ongoing, and it's unclear exactly how definitive this particular company is and exactly how they'll mitigate. And so there's still pieces of business to be followed up with that particular situation. But what it uncovered and what it exposed is something that we see across the entire city of Los Angeles and have for years and years and years. And that is one particular industry. It's not always this particular industry, the billboard industry, has a history of this type of activity, unfortunately. And I'm not sitting here to make an example of the industry itself, because I think the city itself is also responsible for what we find ourselves in today in terms of this very inadequate protocol. And what we have to realize when incidents like this happen, we have to ask ourselves this: do we as a city really, truly value our urban forest? Do we really, truly value our urban tree canopy? Especially in this time of climate change that is becoming more severe and more real and is giving our neighborhoods direct consequences by the day, and how our tree canopy reduces the heat island effect, and how ever increasingly is it necessary to not just protect our tree canopy in our urban forest, but to ensure that these types of practices don't go without repercussions and without consequences. Just today, I was on the EPA website, Environmental Protection Agency, and here are just some of the facts about trees. Shaded surfaces can be between 20 and 45%, degrees, 20 and 45 temperature degrees cooler than the peak temperatures of unshaded areas. Improved air quality and lower greenhouse gas emissions. By reducing energy demand, trees and vegetation decrease the production of associated air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. They also remove air pollutants and store and sequester carbon dioxide. The warming that results from urban heat islands over small areas such as cities is an example of local climate change. Thus, advancing measures to mitigate urban heat islands also helps to address global climate change. Trees also protect your family's health by improving air quality, by providing cooling shade for outdoor activities, and reducing exposure to harmful UV radiation. There is no doubt in my mind that what happened in Silver Lake and what happens across the city on a regular basis is not necessarily malintent from anyone who's trimming trees or ruining trees without a permit. They simply want to serve their interest. And I won't even judge what that is, but we kind of all know what that is. But the bottom line is, there's never been a more important time to value and grow and protect our urban canopy than now. What happened in Silver Lake, when the leaves spring from these trees again, it's going to be a greatly diminished tree canopy. It's going to take years for it to come back, and it'll never be as uniform as it was over the summer and fall in this beautiful, beautiful area that provided so much loveliness in the heart of Silver Lake. So I think as a city, we have to stop wringing our hands over how to enforce this type of illegal activity. We have to come up with more punitive measures that really strike at the financial aspect of companies and private interests that trim trees illegally to the point of ruining them. And that's why I wanted to introduce this motion. Lastly, I will say that in 2009, 7 years ago, an ordinance was staged to be adopted by the full city council. It never happened. So we have been caught very flat-footed on this one, and I want to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And so I'm going to have a lot of questions, but where I want this all to lead to is the adoption of a strong policy that puts a statement out to the city of Los Angeles and to the world that Los Angeles is a city that values our environment, that values our neighborhoods, that value the businesses and the residents who derive a greater quality of life from having a robust urban canopy. Unfortunately, our ordinances and our laws, nor does our punitive response portray that, quite frankly. We talk all the time about let's plant 1 million trees, let's plant a lot of trees and let's water them and take care of them, and then we're just completely bereft of any response when this type of vandalism occurs. We just planted 140 trees in Glassell Park in the last 6 months. 140 trees. What's going to prevent someone in 5 years from now, when those trees have increased in value, to just go out and cut them down and not have any consequences? So with that, I know we're going to have a presentation from Bureau of Street Trees, and I think the City Attorney's Office is here also. I'm going to have some questions, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you.
I understand Mr. Lorenzen's here from the Bureau of Street Services. Welcome.
Welcome to all of you,
I want to
Mr.
recognize
Chair.
the President of the Public Works Commission, Commissioner Kevin James. Thank you for your presence. Go ahead, Mr. Lorenzen.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Ron Lorenzen, Assistant Director at Bureau of Street Services. As Councilman O'Farrell has eloquently put forth, the issues that we have with the urban forest and street trees in particular are like the previous issue in front of this body, are great issues that need to be addressed today. Real quick, I'll try to be as brief as possible because I know it's getting late. Just to give you a little bit of background, as the councilman has indicated, back in June of 2009, the council actually put forth, I'm sorry, that was in September. September of 2009, council actually put forth to the city attorney's office a recommendation by the Bureau of Street Services to create an administrative remedy for issues involving the illegal removal and pruning of street trees. Real quickly, the board report suggested a fine of $1,000 per offense, so you could actually fine $1,000 per tree that was actually improperly pruned or removed. At that time, the council did move that forward and directed the city attorney's office to draft an ordinance, which the Bureau of Street Services had actually put forth language for that ordinance. Now, in defense of the city attorney's office, this is 2009. A lot was happening in 2009, and we know that the resources that the city had available in all departments was greatly reduced at that time. So here we are again, and in response to what I know the councilman's office is going to put forth, I could go on as to many of the things suggested by Councilman O'Farrell that we've already done and are continuing to do. We are going to go ahead and resurrect that motion to the council. I don't know if we even have to resurrect that. We may be able to just move that now with the city attorney's office to move forward that remedy, administrative remedy. As well as I have read what the council office has put forth, we will come back with a written report relative to all of those things that we have been directed to do, and we will come forth with solutions to the problem. As the councilman has indicated, not only is it the EPA that is saying this, our mayor, obviously, in his sustainability model and his sustainability plan, that street trees are a really, really paramount part of that. And we realize that at the Bureau of Street Services. And while we're here, I would just like to state that we have a new chief forester here. It's Tim Tyson, who is sitting over here to my left with President James. Mr. Tyson will be moving the ball forward on this, and I will always be here as far as policy issues and things like that are related to the urban forest. So if you have any questions at all, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Welcome, Mr. Tyson. This committee looks forward to working with you. Mr. O'Farrell has a few questions.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Ron. Let's talk about the Silver Lake incident specifically. Where are we with the investigation? Do we have a sense of where we are?
With the investigation of this particular instance, we are actually providing all of the information that the Bureau has, and Mr. Harris is here with investigation and enforcement. He's working with the City Attorney's Office to criminally process that complaint, because as you know right now, the only remedy we have is a criminal process.
Okay, and maybe I could ask the City Attorney's Office, are you going to file a criminal complaint? Because that's what we want to see happen.
Good afternoon, council members. David Michelson with the Office of the City Attorney, Chief Assistant City Attorney. I've got Don Kochek and Rita Venegas with our criminal branch. Rita heads up our ACE citation program, Administrative Citation Enforcement. Don's involved in prosecuting cases that could involve, for instance, tree destruction, tree harming, tree removal. I guess I'm a little confused. I've heard from the department that in 2009, you say, there was a motion that was adopted by full council requesting an ordinance that was not delivered. I will personally go back and research that, and we'll get on top of that if that's indeed the case. However, I'm also a little confused because currently on the books, and has been on the books for some time, is in the Muni Code an ordinance that makes it a misdemeanor if you do what these folks do. Up to 6 months imprisonment or $1,000 fine, restitution, all things you cannot get out of the ACE citation program, although we'll look at that. Maybe that's another tool for the toolbox. But one of our frustrations is if a case is brought to the City Attorney's Office, to our criminal branch, for the law we already have on the books, you bet we're going to look at it hard, and you bet we'll prosecute if appropriate. The cases need to be brought to our office.
You haven't received it yet. It sounds like they're working it up right now to then transmit to you, but it hasn't happened yet.
I appreciate that, but over many years, there's been instances where trees have been injured, damaged, killed, and removed, and cases could have been brought forward potentially under the city's existing law. So we are very committed in the City Attorney's Office from the top down to protecting the city's trees. I know the City Attorney, Mike Fuhrer, himself is personally concerned about the health and well-being of trees, both trees that are in the city public road right-of-way, trees that are to be protected under the city's other ordinance. It's the protected tree ordinance, where we've got trees, it could be oak trees, walnut trees, sycamore trees on private property that cannot be harmed without a prior written permit issued by the Department of Public Works. That law needs to be enforced as well, quite frankly.
And let me ask you, when was the last time the City Attorney's Office actually prosecuted, once you received, well, two points. When was the last time you received a transmittal of a complaint? And then secondly, when was the last time you prosecuted on a violation?
That question was asked of me earlier today, and I've been working as a prosecutor for 29 years, and I can't remember the last case we got.
Okay, see, there's the problem. And I'm not blaming anyone, but this exposed the gulf, I think, between incidents like this and then the follow-through for the consequences. Not blaming anyone, but clearly we've got to fix this.
You're absolutely right, Councilmember, and I spoke with your office earlier this morning, and I think your office is going to convene a meeting. Yes. I strongly suggested it's a great idea for the Department of Public Works, a client that we work very well with, for our office, both our prosecutors and on our civil side. Let's make sure our house is in order. Yeah. If new legislation is needed, you bet, working with the department and the council, that can be brought forward quickly and enacted and put in place. But we've got tools out there now, and let's first figure out what is the current status of the situation in protecting the city's trees and what additional tools would be helpful.
And I have many things to say. I'm going to try to synopsize it as much as I can here. But when we tighten the rules here and when we make the violations and the prosecution more punitive, it's going to affect everyone equally, not just billboard companies. And that needs to be really crystal clear. We have a lot of incidents that don't involve billboard companies. And I think we have such a tradition and such an existing sort of, what do you want to call it, way of doing things that people and entities across the city know that we don't really enforce anything, and for a variety of reasons, and just do it all over the city. So we're going to have to really raise the profile of this issue. We're going to have to raise the awareness that our tree canopy isn't just important, it's really vital to our health and well-being, and then go accordingly. So as we wend our way forward and figure this out and develop the right approach, it's not going to be just billboard companies that are ensnared in this. It'll be anyone who illegally damages a tree without a permit. I wanted to ask make a few suggestions, and we'll take a look at, we'll have to reconcile what Mr. Michelson said and the 09 ordinance that never was adopted. We'll do that through this process, but I want more. I don't know that $1,000 for any tree is enough. What if it's a tree that has increased in value because it's a huge, beautiful tree that provides a canopy and oxygen? And why should that be just $1,000 if it's ruined, if it's a tree that's only been in the ground for 6 months? I think that we need to monetize the value of our trees and then follow accordingly and demand that a tree that is destroyed unlawfully be replaced by the exact same size and expeditiously as well. I also think that we have an issue with when permits are applied for tree trimming. I think that just like when you apply for a permit to open a store or to develop something, build something, we should have a website where all permits applied for tree trimming are publicly accessible. I think that's a suggestion that we should really entertain. Okay, got that. Okay, so Ron, do you have a response to that?
As I mentioned, we will, in our written report back, address all of the issues that your staff has sent me. And I would also like to, I have personal knowledge of, but I can't tell you the year that it occurred. But actually, one of your neighborhood prosecutors actually did prosecute a case. I believe it was about 5 years ago. It was in the Sherman Oaks area. I will have staff look back into that because I know the field staff who worked on that will remember the neighborhood prosecutor with whom they worked, and they actually did get a prosecution on a case. But remember that we must criminally file, the way the law in 62, 161 through 176 exists today, we must criminally file because there's no administrative penalty. That's what we're suggesting, and that's what was suggested back in 09 and 10. There was actually a motion by Councilman Weezar's office in 2010 that basically put forth the same exact thing that we had already put forth in 2009. So the Bureau is aware of all of the issues that you would like us to address, and we will be addressing those. We will work with the City Attorney's Office on any of those things that we need to work together to make happen. He did also mention, the City Attorney's Office mentioned the Protected Tree Ordinance, that's Section 46. What we are requesting is an administrative remedy not only for tree trimming or the lack of pulling of permits or improper pruning, but also the illegal removal of street trees or protected trees. To us, it is the same thing, just so that you kind of understand. Protected trees are those trees on private property the city has deemed, because of their species, that need protection. All street trees are protected by Section 62, 161 through 176, which states that you need a permit. That's the protection that's allotted them, the same as protected trees under Section 46. So if you have any other specific questions, I'll be happy to answer.
I'm going to make my recommendations next, but... Sure. Yeah, we have Mr. Ryu. Community members have been waiting for, and they attended.
Mr. Ryu.
Thank you.
I just want to say I fully support Councilmember O'Farrell's motion, and it's interesting to hear the history, and I think this is a great opportunity. You know, it's been brought up, I guess, in 09, in 10, and now again, and I'm open to all, whether we go for just adding an administrative penalty clause, which might hopefully make it easier or whatnot. And I'm also very much open to what Councilmember O'Farrell suggested about increasing the penalty fees. And I'm supportive in that for us to look at all our penalty fees assessed, not just for this issue, but everything else, to make sure it's relative. Because sometimes, and you know, if it was a homeowner who wasn't aware that they needed to pull a permit, then yes, I don't want to throw the entire book at that person, but still there should be a penalty clause. But if it was some other entity, or for any other cases, we want to make sure that the fine matches Because sometimes people knowing there's a fine, they still do it because they don't mind paying the fine. So it needs to be relatively matching. So I'm very open to that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the department comes back and makes these recommendations.
Thank you. We have a number of cards on this item. If I can please welcome Scott Crawford, followed by Claire Frith. Please come forward. Claire will be followed by Robert Pepe. Please come forward. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Scott Crawford. I'm a 25-year resident of Silver Lake. My business is in Silver Lake, and I'm an Obama appointee. I came out of my sickbed today just to say I strongly support this item.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Please get well. Claire, followed by Robert Pepe. Please come forward. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire Frith. I am a 30-year resident of Silver Lake. I'm very proud of it, and everybody in the city should have the urban forests of Silver Lake. That's why we care so much, and that's why I came today. I strongly support Councilman Farrell's motion, and we need to ensure protection and preservation of our Silver Lake community trees. Maximum penalty should be leveled against all offending parties who desecrate our trees. A $1,000 fine is ludicrous. It cost me $5,000 just to partially trim one of my trees. So that certainly, I hope, gets amended. The Outfront Media's permit should be revoked, and the billboard atop El Condor restaurant should be removed as soon as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Pepe, followed by Pasquale Lombardo.
Okay. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Bobby Pepe. The Silver Lake community is very unhappy with the damage done to our trees in Sunset Triangle Park by Outfront Media USA. I support council members' motion. A $1,000 fine is, for Outfront Media USA is like a flea bite on an elephant. I urge the city to increase fines for outlaw outfits like Outfront Media USA and include penalties up to and including the revocation of the permit for the offending billboard, including removal of the billboard by the offending company. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lombardo, what part of Italy is your family from?
Calabria.
Calabria.
The southernmost
Calabresi.
province. Va bene, va
I'm
bene.
sure we're
Parla
related.
italiano anche lei.
Sì, certo, parlo italiano.
Sì. Thank
I'm
you
sure
for
we're
pronouncing.
cousins. I'm sure we're related somewhere.
Most likely, most likely. Thank you for pronouncing my name so correctly.
Welcome, sir.
It's rare. It's rare. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Pasquale Lombardo, and I'm a 15-year resident of Silver Lake. I live on Maltman Avenue, about 1 block from Silver Lake Sunset Triangle Plaza, where this incident took place, and I'm an attorney. And I'm here to support Councilman O'Farrell's motion. There was a meeting, as Councilman O'Farrell mentioned, between representatives of Outfront Media and members of the community. I think there were 15, 20 of us there, and some representatives from the councilman's office. And we were very, very upset with what had happened a couple days after Christmas. And there was a representative there from Bureau of Street Services, and I was surprised, we were all surprised to hear there are no enforcement powers within the Bureau for incidents like this. So certainly, all of us, I think, support Councilman O'Farrell's motion here to develop these protocols and review what's in place. But there really need to be some serious sanctions in place to deal with incidents like this. Like the woman Claire, who just spoke, $1,000 is nothing. To a large corporation, a large billboard company like Outfront, $1,000 is pocket change. It's just a nuisance value. They need to face serious sanctions when they start harming our urban canopy, which is important for all the reasons that Councilman O'Farrell stated, for global warming, for the heat in the city, and just for the aesthetics of the city. We all live here, and it makes for a better community to have a vibrant tree canopy. So I definitely recommend strong administrative sanctions for this kind of activity. And frankly, I do support the idea of vandalism charges being filed against this company. I was on Metro taking the red line a couple days ago, and I saw a sign encouraging people to report graffiti. And I was thinking, wow, interesting. Young people all over the city are prosecuted for putting a little bit of paint on the wall, and they carry around a criminal record for the rest of their life. And yet, companies like Outfront get to butcher. And if you go down there to our plaza and look at these trees, you'll see I'm not exaggerating. They get to butcher our trees and walk away without any penalty. That is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And our final speaker on this item, Jenny Binstock. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jenny Binstock. I work for Tree People, a nonprofit organization, for over 40 years. We've worked on protecting our urban canopy. We also work on increasing our local water supply. I'm also a community member in your district, and so I want to thank you for introducing this motion. You basically said everything that I could say about the value of trees. You know, in addition to the beauty that they provide our neighborhoods, they're also fundamental public health protections. They're critical interventions for promoting equity in a variety of ways. And so I wasn't even going to comment today, and then was really moved by what was discussed here. I think it's really important. One, the awareness point that was brought up earlier is, I think the city could do a much better job, and we are very supportive of working alongside the city to promote better awareness about all of the extensive benefits, not just the public health ones, not just equity issues, but also all of the benefits for stormwater capture, supply, water quality, flood protection. And secondly, as we're considering how we develop more robust management, because this is such a long-term investment for the reasons you've described, it requires a long-term and robust management strategy that every single benefit, of which there are many, are considered in how we value trees. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Mr. O'Farrell, I believe you mentioned you had some recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jenny, I'm glad you spoke. Thank you. And just before I make the recommendations, you know, we had a situation in a different community in the 13th District recently where a billboard company actually met with the community to talk about mitigating an issue where the billboard couldn't be seen because of tree overgrowth. The community, and with our office's involvement, worked it out. We worked it out. And so that's a possibility whenever someone, a business, a billboard company, you name it, wants to increase the sight line on their billboard, they can meet with our office, they can meet with the community, and it can result in solving the problem that might result in several trees planted elsewhere. There are ways to deal with this, but what happened in late December is not the way to do it. So the first part is I want full prosecution, so I'm glad you're working up the order and you'll transmit it to the City Attorney's Office on this particular issue. So, recommendations. I recommend that we hold this item in committee and request the following reports back from the Bureau and the City Attorney. Request that the Bureau of Street Services, with the assistance of the City Attorney, provide a written report back on recommendations for establishing monetary administrative fines for illegal tree pruning and removals, including its potential inclusion in the Administrative Citation Enforcement Program, or ACE program, and furthermore, that the fines are commensurate with the value of the tree, value and or size, height, width of the caliper of the tree. The report should include a rationale for the fine amount. The report should include recommendations that would allow the administrative fine to be applicable to both the party contracted to perform the work as well as the party hiring that contractor. Additionally, I recommend that the Bureau of Street Services provide a written report back on the Bureau's current protocols and ability to inspect tree pruning and removal permits, as well as recommendations to improve current practices. The report should include, but not be limited to, the number of tree pruning and tree removal violations incurred over the past 5 years. Let's see an inventory. the level of staffing necessary to inspect every tree pruning and removal permit before and after work is completed, amending the tree pruning permit rules to require a submittal of a before and after pictures or pictorials of each tree permitted to be pruned on a publicly accessible website. Recommendations for ensuring that the city deny repeat offenders issuance of future tree pruning and removal permits, as well as limiting their ability to compete for city contracts. And lastly, recommendations for requiring permittees to physically post notifications on trees when the permit calls for pruning of 3 trees or more, which is commensurate with the removal of trees that require a posting. Yes.
That it?
Those are my recommendations.
Okay, we'll
Mr.
hold this
Chair.
item in committee and hear for those report backs. How much time do you want to give them, Mr. O'Farrell? What do you think?
It's a lot. Do you think 30 days? 30? Ron's like, oh, no. But yeah, and so those are my recommendations. I think this one-off issue in Silver Lake is separate, and I think that's moving on its own timeline, and I'm grateful for that. So I certainly don't want to roll that into this. So that's separate, and that's moving forward. But let's do this within 30 days as far as these recommendations.
That'll be the order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. At this point, we'll hear general public comment. Okay, seeing no general public comment, speaker cards. With that, I think that's it. Our committee's now adjourned. Thank you all.